I have been a fan of Let's Not Meet stories for some time now. The majority of kidnapping/attempted kidnapping stories I read tend to happen to females. As a man in his 20s, I thought I should share the 3 times I was almost kidnapped while growing up. The first story happened when I was 4 or 5 years old. This happened to be one of my earliest memories. So, one summer, my grandparents would invite my immediate family to go camping with them. They have an RV just big enough to cram us all in. We RV camped at a place called Goose Pond in North Alabama. During this trip, my grandpa taught me how to ride a bike without training wheels. After many tries and fails, I was actually able to ride my bike pretty well. So, out of excitement, I asked my parents if my brother, who was a few years older than me, and I could go for a ride on our bikes. They said we could ride this short loop where about 60% of the loop can be seen from the RV. So me and my brother grabbed our bikes and took off. While riding around the loop, nothing eventful happened until we reached the final turn. This turn was barely out of view from my parents and the RV. So, when my brother and I turned the loop, a car pulled up behind us, so we got off our bikes and stepped off the road to let the car pass. When the car got parallel to us, it stopped. A man from the car rolled down his window and started talking to us. He said something along the lines of,
"I have candy in my car if you want some. Just come over here. I'll give you a piece."
Ignorant young me took a step in the man's direction. As soon as I took that step, my brother grabbed my shoulder and said, "Let's go back to the RV." As soon as we pedaled away, the man drove off. This second story happened when I was 10. For some background information, in my small hometown, the Civic Center basically shares a parking lot with the baseball fields. So my family was at the Civic Center to watch my little sister graduate from preschool. The graduation was around 5 p.m., and I had a baseball game at the fields next door at 7. So after the graduation, I asked my parents if I could walk across the parking lot to find my team while they cleaned up, and they gave me their blessing. As soon as I walked out the front door and turned to head to the baseball fields, I saw 2 men loitering in the parking lot. They saw that I was alone and asked me to come over to them. Me being oblivious to danger, I said that I need to get to my game that started soon. They asked if I play baseball and why my parents would let someone like me walk all by myself. They offered to walk with me, and I replied, "No thanks, I'm just going to the baseball fields." When they noticed I wasn't cooperating as they hoped, one of the men lunged in my direction and grabbed at me. Luckily, I was far enough away that he didn't get to me, and I took off. I don't think I have ever run faster in my entire life before this. Luckily, the men didn't run after me, and I found my team moments later. When my parents got to the field, they were panicking to find me. Apparently, someone reported those men to those in the Civic Center, and my parents were scared to death that they got me. My last story happened when I was 14. Again, as background information, my house is next to a major highway with several gas stations and a convenience store within walking distance. My hometown is one of the safest towns in the state. Close to this incident, my town was ranked one of the 25 safest towns. Because of this, my parents didn't mind if I walked to the store to grab some snacks, as long as I asked permission first. So, one day, I was walking to the store. Nothing happened on the way down there, so I walked into the store to buy some snacks. On the way back, I noticed a truck driving by me. When he passed, I looked up and saw the man driving was staring right at me. He wasn't paying attention to the road, just me. So he passed me and I saw him turn around at the entrance of the neighborhood by my house and start heading back in my direction. At this time, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I see people turning around there all the time. When he drove by me the second time, he was going noticeably slower than the first time and was staring me down. When he got parallel to me, he stopped and opened his door to try to grab me. God must have been looking out for me, because as soon as he did, a car pulled up behind him and forced him to continue down the road. As he drove away, I watched him and saw him turn around again and start heading in my direction. At this point, I was panicking. I took off behind my neighbor's house and hopped the fence into my backyard and went inside my house. I remembered I was home alone and the terror started to sink in. I immediately rushed to the window to see the man carefully scanning the area where he last saw me. He was looking for me. He stayed in his car, going so slow that it took him what seemed like 5 minutes to pass my house. When he started to pass my house, I noticed he was trying to see through my windows from the road. I ducked down and hid, only looking through the bottom corner of the window. Eventually, I saw him speed off, never to return again. As a boy growing up, people never thought these types of things could happen. It is a mystery to me how I was able to avoid kidnappers 3 times. Most people aren't that lucky. To all the young people and parents hearing this, it doesn't matter if it's a boy or a girl, predators are everywhere. And to my attempted kidnappers, I hope we never meet again. Okay, so this happened in 2016 when I was a 17-year-old first-year college student in film school. I'm now a 22-year-old female. Name is Julia. I lived alone in my first ever apartment. It was really small, but I was really proud of my independence. I never felt unsafe in this apartment for several reasons. There were multiple gates in the residence that needed to be opened through a code that only people who lived there knew. My door had 3 different locks, but it was right next to the university, so most people who lived in the neighborhood were college students. Nothing bad ever happened in the neighborhood before. I've always been very careful with locking the door when I leave my home. I always check twice. I have slide OCD. So, this one time, I leave to go to class and lock my door, but for some reason, I couldn't get the key out of the lock. It was completely stuck. So I went to the caretaker of the building to help me, but he wasn't there, and I was getting late for class. So I went to class with the key still in the lock. I took off the keychain first, so it wasn't too noticeable. When I got home, the caretaker was back, so he came to help me, but we couldn't get it out for 15 minutes, until somehow he did. He told me the lock was damaged, but that I didn't necessarily need to change it if I only locked it once, instead of twice. I just said okay, and that was the end of it. I really wasn't worried because of how safe I felt this building was. Flash forward to 2 months later. I was taking out the trash one night around 11 p.m. while on the phone with my sister. I remember telling her that I was taking out the trash, then I would be taking a shower before heading to a party. As I previously stated, I always lock the door, even just to take out the trash. Because of my lock being damaged, I only locked it once. When I got back to my apartment, I found that the door was unlocked, which immediately alarmed me. So, I went into the apartment and locked the door immediately with 3 different types of locks. When you walk into my apartment, which is only 215 square feet. You have the main room in front of you, and the bathroom door immediately to your left. I had left the bathroom door slightly open, enough so I could see a man in my shower, turning his back to me. Naturally, when I saw this, I tried to open the door and leave as fast as possible, except my main lock was damaged from 2 months earlier, and I couldn't open it no matter how hard I tried. In this moment, all I could think of was the fact that I had to leave as fast as possible. I jumped out the window without really thinking. I figured it was the only solution, except I lived on the 2nd floor, so I completely smashed my ankles in the landing. I started running in whichever way I could, and when I got a little bit further from the building, I looked back and the man was there, at my window, watching me run away. I thought of 2 possible outcomes. Either the man was going to jump and chase me, except I wouldn't get far with my twisted ankles, or he would get scared of the height and be locked in my apartment. Thankfully, he picked option 2. I went to hide in a bush a little further and called the police, who arrived in just 10 minutes because I lived close to the station. They pushed my door open and the man was just sitting on my couch, holding a kitchen knife, just waiting for me to come back, like he didn't think I would call the police. They arrested the guy and later told me that he had already been arrested for sexual assault, rape, attempted kidnapping, and attempted murder. They also told me how everything had happened. Like I said, it was a very friendly neighborhood with mostly college students, so he got inside the building by other people holding the door for him. He then heard me telling my sister I was going to take a shower, which was why he was waiting in my bathroom. He picked my lock while I was taking out the trash. He apparently noticed me on school campus and followed me to my home several times before succeeding to actually come in. He stayed inside waiting for me because I had recently changed my phone and the previous one was still on the table, so he thought I didn't have a phone with me to call the police. I don't live there anymore, but after that, to get into the building, we all needed identification proving that we lived there. Building IDs were created, and we had to scan them every time, and it was the only way to go inside of the building. Nothing bad happened in the neighborhood after that. It's back to being very peaceful and friendly. I think I just escaped death. This morning, I just got out of class and was headed home. I then saw a crippled old lady begging for help and telling me that she needed to get into her apartment. I helped her, took an elevator, and took her to her door. To my surprise, the door was wide open. When I went inside, she asked me if I could go to a nearby shop for her and buy some wine and cigarettes. She then proceeded to give me her credit card and keys and insisted on the fact that I should leave my bag in her house. I said no thank you. Even though the situation was weird, it wasn't that scared me the most. It was the inside of the apartment. There was no decorations, no pictures or anything. It was disgusting. There was some kind of chair with excrements on it, and the walls were filled with cracks. I got scared and took the card and the keys, tried to act as normal as possible, and then I wanted to test it to see if the card was real. I went to the store and the woman said that the card wasn't a real one. It was at this moment that I decided not to go to her house and gave the keys and the card to the police. A friend of mine told me that she saw the exact same lady saying the exact same things she told me, and the scariest thing is that she saw a man bring her outside and immediately go inside her apartment. I have had several dreams similar to the story I'm about to tell. I've been a caver in Florida for about 13 years, since I was about 6, and have been to a lot of caves. Never been afraid before this to go into one. When I was about 7 or 8 years old, I started having this reoccurring dream. I would have it at least twice a year, always the same, even though I would realize I was dreaming after the first few iterations. I would fall asleep and dream of being in a cave and going into this little hole in the bottom. Inside, I would see a 10 to 15 foot long corridor, about 2 to 4 feet high. At the end of it, I would always turn left, and I always saw a bent red stop sign at the end, like someone ripped off the top 2 feet and tossed it in. I would turn and walk past the sign, despite being scared, despite many times knowing what was there, and the corridor would start descending, quickly opening up into a large vertical chamber with the path leading down in a corkscrew. Everything became blurry at this point, but it was always the same. I saw trash scattered on the walls. I saw the pit leading down to a curved floor. I saw things, undefined, animals or people or something else at the bottom. And I saw my family, each with one of the things, being tortured and killed every time, and I could never do anything. After I saw that, I would be stuck for a few seconds until I felt more, then saw everything turn around and look at me. Then I would wake up, not like a normal dream where you just drift into consciousness, or a nightmare where you bolt up in fear, but like something pushed me out, like I wasn't supposed to be there. So, I had this dream multiple times a year, until I turned 15. I did tell a friend about the dream before what happened next. My father decided to take us to some caves we had never been before, one of which was Dog Drop. It was likely named so because someone either threw their pet in there or a coyote fell and the body was later discovered. Dog Drop had a roughly 30-foot rappel straight down to enter. I went down with my brother while my father waited up at the top. There was a hole in the ground. I started to feel uneasy, though I didn't know why. So I followed my brother into the hole. I felt worse as I moved down. I saw the same corridor, the same turn, the same wall, the same bottles at the corner, and I instantly was hit with this overwhelming sense of nausea and fear and being watched, and everything was screaming at me to leave. I froze and must have made some noise because my brother turned around and asked me what was wrong. I managed to say I wanted to leave now and climbed out as quickly as I could, followed immediately by my brother. We packed up and left, never have gone back, and never will. I haven't told anyone what actually happened. I just said that I wasn't feeling well, and they forgot pretty quickly. The thing that really makes it creepy for me is that I have never had that dream again. Year after year, I would have it consistently, but it just stopped after that. But I still remember it all, and I still feel afraid, almost an external fear. when I think of it. I've known about this subreddit for a while now, but I've never gotten around to telling my own story, which of course, I never thought I'd have to. Since it's long, I won't bother with a long intro. This is all you need to know. This happened my senior year of college, and I lived off campus. I had 2 roommates in my apartment townhouse thing, named Natalie and Katie. Katie was out that night doing homework in one of the school buildings, and I was awoken at 3 a.m. when I heard some knocking at the door downstairs. I thought that was weird considering the hour, but I figured somebody had the wrong place and would realize and leave. The knocking didn't stop, and I lied in bed for a good several minutes thinking, yeah, they'll go away now. They'll go away. They'll get bored. As one might expect though, I started to grow confused and then kind of freaked out by this person's persistence. Then the knocking turned into banging and I couldn't ignore it anymore. Honestly, I probably should have called the police instantly, but it was the middle of the night and I was just confused, so I headed to the top of the stairs to see Natalie standing near the door, staring at it. Her room was on the bottom floor, so she had just walked up to it. We exchanged a baffled look, because what the heck, it's 3 a.m. This is weird. Natalie called out and asked them who they were and what they wanted.
"We're friends of Katie's,"
said the voice on the other end, who sounded male and about our age.
"We know her boyfriend. We, heard she was feeling down, so we came to surprise her."
That was already a weird story because, again, 3 in the morning. But thankfully, Katie wasn't even home, so we both informed them of this. Katie's not here, she's off doing something else. Good. They're going to leave, right? They came here to see Katie, she's not here, they'll leave us alone and we can go back to sleep.
"Just open the door."
I know. If I hadn't called the police before, I definitely should have done it now. It was weird though. That night, I realized why people do stupid stuff in horror films. Not only had I been woken up out of nowhere, but it feels surreal to be in a situation like this, like there's no way you could actually be in danger. That only happens in horror movies, in true crime documentaries, and in questionable, creepy stories online. It would never happen to me. I'm just a random, ordinary, boring person going about my business. I don't need to call the police. I'm sure this will get cleared up and everything will be fine. So, yeah, Natalie and I did the stupid thing and tried to argue with them. We told them that again, Katie wasn't here. There was no need for them to stay. Eventually, Natalie asked what their names were. Throughout the encounter, we made out 2 distinct voices, but only gave us one name, and I texted Katie without telling him, asking if she was friends with someone with that name. After a couple of minutes, during which we were still arguing with the stranger, Katie replied, "I am, but I don't think she knows where I live." That wasn't good. But even worse, the person on the other side of the door had a male voice. So this was a real name, but not the real person. Whoever this was knew stuff about Katie, like who she hung out with. I told Katie to stay where she was and not to come back until we told her everything was okay. Finally, we told the guys that if they didn't leave, we were going to call the police.
No. Don't call the police, okay? If we wanted to do something bad, we would have already done it, right?
Yeah, that last bit wasn't helping their case.
Just open the door.
The attempts at reasoning with them basically devolved into them telling us, just open the door, over and over again, until we finally actually did call the police. We hid in Natalie's room and dialed 911 and explained what was going on. Thankfully, there was a police station close by, so it wouldn't take long for them to arrive. Unfortunately, I made the mistake of heading back into the living room and yelling through the door that we'd called the cops. But contrary to what you might think, that actually didn't seem to scare them at all. They seemed only mildly upset and kept arguing. To this day, I can only assume that they just didn't believe us or something. Then we heard a neighbor's home door swing open in a very pissed off man's voice. "If you don't leave right now, I'm calling the police." For whatever reason, that was what caused them to freak out, and they drove off. The police arrived, and we told them the whole story. Natalie revealed that a couple of times she had just barely peeked out of the blinds of the window close to the front door, and she noted that there were two guys, but only one of them was ever at the door at a given time. They would switch, with one at the door and the other sitting in the driver's seat of a car parked out front, presumably for getaway purposes. So, yeah, that's reassuring. They also hadn't looked drunk, according to Natalie, and they definitely hadn't sounded like they were drunk. There wasn't much the police could do besides sweep the area a bit, but they told us that if the strangers showed up again, to immediately call instead of engaging with them at all. One of the officers did give us some self-defense tactics and told us what kind of household items and chemicals would work best for self-defense. After making sure everything was okay and reassuring us, they left, and we eventually called Katie and told her the weirdos were gone. She arrived and was understandably a bit shaken herself. We sat down and asked her who might have known where she lived. She did know people who had come to the apartment, so some people, certainly, but Natalie hadn't recognized the guys outside as any previous visitors. Worse, it turned out that not only did they know Katie's friend's name, but they claimed to know her boyfriend even though he didn't even live in the state where we were going to school. She swore up and down that she didn't know anyone who would want to hurt her. By this point, it was around 5 a.m., so I didn't even bother going to sleep, since I was going to a workshop that morning. I told a lot of my classmates the story, and it freaked them out too, and the entire day, Natalie and I jumped at every unexpected noise, every shadow, every random movement. That night, it was hard to sleep. I expected to hear knocking at the door at any second. Thankfully, they didn't come back, ever. But that almost makes things more unsettling, in a way. I'll never know what they wanted that night. Did they think we were hiding Katie? Was she seeing less than savory people in secret? Did they want to hurt her? If they did, why did they never give up and go looking for her elsewhere? Was all of this just an excuse to get into the apartment of young women? Did they want to kidnap us, hurt us, rob us? Who knows? I try not to let it bother me, but I wish I knew if my life was in danger that night. I have a feeling it might have been. After all, they weren't wearing face coverings, so if they wanted to commit a violent crime, they might want to get rid of the witnesses. But despite how much I wish I knew, yeah, random strange men who insisted we let them in for unknown reasons. Let's not meet.
I was working at my first ever job in retail. I was around 20 years old. It was a busy morning, 9 a.m., somewhere mid-December, hence why it was so busy. I was working the checkouts as per usual, scanning items, ringing up customers, and all that jazz. About an hour into my shift, I was serving an elderly man who bought just a handful of items. After giving him his subtotal, another guy behind him, smelling of booze, stretched out handing me cash. I kindly told him I wasn't serving him. I was serving the man in front of him. Then I looked down and saw he was buying some cheap knockoff Bailey's booze. And of course, it wasn't hard to figure out. The guy was wasted. Just as I was taking payment from the elderly man, I was planning in my head how I was going to tell the next guy that I could not sell alcohol to him as he was already drunk. This was my first job and I never encountered this sort of thing before, so I finished serving the first guy and went on to the drunk guy. I looked around in hopes to find another colleague or my manager, but no one was in sight or available to help. So I looked at the man, and just before I opened my mouth, I felt something which felt like someone grabbed a fistful of my hair and something sharp poked me in the back. And of course, a man whispered in my ear, "Serve my mate," to which I also smelt alcohol on his breath. He pushed what I'm assuming was a knife harder into my back and then said, "Now." In complete shock, I said nothing, just scanned the bottle, took the cash, and they were gone. I quickly turned around to my colleague working checkouts behind me, but all they did was look at me and asked if I was okay, completely unaware of what had just happened. Then I went for my break. I see my manager pass by, so I rushed over to him and told him what had just happened. All he did was laugh because he thought I was joking, but criticized me for selling alcohol to someone under the influence. Whatever that sharp object was that was in my back had cut me. Before my break, I could feel blood running down my back and it was sore. Of course, no one could see the blood as my uniform was black. I screamed, "It's true, it did happen," then turned around and lifted my hair as I have very long hair. Lift up my shirt or get the female colleague close by to do it. This guy sliced me. But the manager just said, "Ew, no, I don't want to see you lift up your shirt," and just walked away staring into his phone. Well, I did not return to finish my shift. I snuck out the store, took a taxi, and went home. My mom cleaned up my back and dressed it. Then the next morning, she called work to tell them I would not be returning because the manager's incompetence to take action when I could have almost been stabbed over a bottle of alcohol.
I was a 17-year-old college student in France when all of this happened. I was living in an apartment next to my college campus with two roommates. Let's call them Alex and Polly to preserve their anonymity. I was coming back from class around 5:30 p.m. when I saw a guy waiting in front of our building. It was the kind of old building where you could enter without ringing. It was a big residence, so I just passed him without really caring about why he was there. 15 minutes later, the same guy came up to my apartment. He pretended that he was one of Alex's friends, that he was waiting for him, but Alex was late. He also told me the exact place where Alex was doing an internship at the time, and even told me about his schedule for the day. With all the information he gave, I was confident that they knew each other, so I just let him in. For the record, Alex's father used to work for a big company at the time, so even by looking up on the internet, it was impossible to find anything about him. As a good host, I offered him something to drink and started talking with him while waiting for Alex. The conversation quickly turned darker when he started to tell me about his suicidal past and the amount of guns he was keeping at his home. In France, it is really unusual to have a gun at home, unless you are a hunter or in a profession that requires one. It was getting late, and as the conversation got darker, I started to feel uncomfortable with him, so I decided to send a text to Alex just to let him know that his friend was here and that I wasn't really comfortable with him. Alex answered me a few minutes later, asking me to send him a picture of his friend just to see who was here. So I took out my phone and discreetly took a picture of the person in front of me. After receiving it, Alex just told me that he was on his way home. When Alex arrived, I was relieved. He came in the living room and said hello to his friend, but then he just sat down and an awkward silence came along with it. After about a minute, I receive a text from Alex telling me, "I don't know this guy." At that moment, I thought he was joking around, but after seeing his face, I knew he was serious. So here we are, two young college students stuck with a stranger that apparently knows a lot about Alex without ever meeting him. We were both really young at the time, and we didn't really react in a good way. Every human being in this kind of situation would have probably called the police or asked him to leave, but we were really lost and just didn't think about it. We were scared of his reaction if we would have asked him to leave, so we thought, hey, let's eat early so he will feel uncomfortable not being invited for dinner and leave. But as we were dining in the kitchen, he just stayed in the living room and started to watch TV without even asking us. At the same time, our third roommate, Polly, just came home from work. She entered the apartment and said hi to the guy in the living room before joining us in the kitchen. She then asked us who he was and was not really happy when I told her we didn't really have any idea who he was or how to make him leave. We explained to her our dumb strategy of just living our life until he feels uncomfortable and leaves, and she started to act with us and tell us about her day. At that moment, Polly was going through a rough period and was telling us about it. Not a really fun story to tell or listen, but while she was telling us about her misery, the guy in the living room joined us in the kitchen and started laughing about Polly's story before going back to watch TV. It was really creepy. At this moment, Alex had had enough and asked us to leave the apartment while he was going to deal with this guy. This is what happened when we left. Alex got back to the living room and started to act like he was about to go to bed. Another dumb strategy, I know. His room was open to the living room, so he had told the guy that he was about to go to bed and left the door half open while starting to remove his jewelry. He noticed that the guy on the couch wasn't moving or caring about the fact that there was no one left in the apartment except for Alex that was in his room. Alex went up to him and told him that maybe it was time for him to leave and that he was his friend and that he was going to sleep. But the guy replied to him, "I am waiting for the girls." Alex got mad and finally put him out of the apartment. At the same time, Polly and I were going back into the building and met the guy on the stairs. He wished us a good night with a creepy smile and left. Going back to the apartment, Alex told us what happened, and we started to ask ourselves, who was that guy? How did he know Alex's name and surname? How did he know he was working and his schedule? How did he find our address? We spent part of the night trying to find an answer without any success. We learned from our mistakes and decided to never open the door again to someone we didn't know. 2 weeks later, Polly was chilling in her room. She was home alone. Her window was overlooking a view of the parking lot. As she was looking through it, she saw a red car parking. The guy was back. Polly got the very good idea to note his license plate and to verify the door was locked. The guy came up to the apartment and told Polly the exact same thing that he had told me the first time he came. Polly got mad and told him that if he was still here in 5 minutes, she would call the police. It was the last time he came. A few weeks later, Alex came home after work and told us that he finally remembered where he had met this guy. This is the story. Alex used to go to a bar where you were able to play video games while drinking. Apparently, the guy was in the same bar at the machine next to him and tried to talk to Alex, but he was too focused on the game and only took the time to give him a quick hello. We think that the guy probably followed Alex around for a week or two after that day. We moved out of the apartment a few months after this story. Anyway, we would love to never meet this one again. From when I was about 11 to 14 years old, I had a best friend named Spencer. Spencer had a decent-sized family and a big house. We hung out practically non-stop outside of school. He was homeschooled and I was at public school. During the summers, I practically lived at their house. Spencer had an older brother named Keenan. Keenan was about 5 years older than him, and I thought he hung the moon. He was so cool. He listened to great music and played guitar, and I always wanted to be around him. One summer, when I was 13, Keenan went to summer camp. He was supposed to visit the Grand Canyon and go kayaking and do a bunch of fun stuff. We were jealous. It was weird not having him around all the time, since I basically stayed at their house the entire time. Finally, the day came where Spencer's dad was supposed to go to the airport to pick Keenan up. We were super stoked to hear all about camp. His dad drove up and we ran downstairs to greet them, and yet we didn't see Keenan. His dad had tears running down his face as he exclaimed, "He didn't make it. He didn't make it, you guys." My heart dropped into my stomach and I started to panic. Keenan walked right up behind him and they both started laughing. It was a huge dick move. Anyways, we helped him unload his luggage and stayed up till midnight talking about his summer. He had so much to say. He said he had the time of his life and told us all about how he almost went overboard while whitewater rafting and how he surely would have died if he did. As two 13-year-old boys, we were enamored by Keenan and everything he did. We talked about how Spencer and I were going to go to the summer camp once we turned 18. It had been a long day, and it was time for us all to go to bed. Keenan told us that he would tell us more in the morning when he woke up. I had fallen asleep and woken up in a cold sweat because of a nightmare I had had. In my dream, Spencer and I had went about our entire day just as we had before, except when their dad showed up and joked about Keenan dying on his trip. He actually did die. This was practically my idol, and the dream was so vivid. I needed to go and get some water just to calm myself down afterwards. I checked my phone before I headed to the kitchen, and it was 3:30 a.m. The house was so dark, and I had to tiptoe to be quiet and make sure not to wake anyone. As I walked through the den on my way to the kitchen, I see the moonlight spilling into the living room, the only light in the house. I see what I think is a large silhouette, and as I get closer and my eyes adjust, I see Keenan hanging from the ceiling fan. I freak out and run across the room in a dead sprint to turn on the light to to see if my eyes were deceiving me. It was him, except he was asleep and standing in the middle of the room, underneath the fan, with one of his arms raised straight up and over his head. I never knew Keenan to sleepwalk before, and luckily he had snapped out of it before I tried to wake him up. He looked at me super confused, looked around the room, noticed where he was, and said, "Oh yeah, I forgot to tell you guys. I guess I developed a bit of a sleepwalking habit at camp."
A few years back, when I was 17 years old, I went to a party. Everything was alright until the host started getting really intense and creepy. By that point, it was around 3 a.m. and I was pretty drunk. I decided to call an Uber in order to avoid any advances from the insistent guy. The Uber shows up and I try to sober up when I get in. The driver starts making small talk with me, and in the state I was in, I failed to see the red flags. He starts to ask me about the party I was at, and I told him about the creep, and then he told me it was because I was short and cute. He then asked my age, and sensing a weird vibe from him, I told him I was a minor, thinking that would deter any further advances. But it turns out, that was a horrible idea. He was driving pretty recklessly on the highway, and I snapped out of my drunken stupor real fast. He then asked me to go get drinks with him that same night, and told me he really liked me. I quickly told him I'd get grounded if I stayed out any later, and that my mother was awake and waiting for me at home. Keep in mind, I lived in Mexico, and the amount of people, and especially women, that get murdered daily is ridiculously high. When we got to my home address, I noticed the doors were locked, and he kept on insisting on us going to get a drink even though by now it was almost 4 a.m. I tried to act as nice as possible. Then I told him I couldn't that night. He then asked for my phone number, and he told me we can go out the next day. So, not being the first time that some creep had asked me for my number, I gave him my number, but changed the last digit, so he couldn't actually contact me. But then, he actually dialed the phone as I was getting out of the car. Of course my phone didn't ring, and he started getting agitated and said I gave him the wrong number. I played drunk and stupid and recited my number again, but actually said it correctly in order for him to think he heard the last number wrong. He chuckled and said it was his bad, and told me we'd see each other the next day. I made my way into my house and immediately woke up my mom because I was terrified. She managed to calm me down and told me to go to sleep. So I went into my bedroom and started putting on my pajamas when I heard my phone ringing. The Uber driver was trying to video call me, and I lost my shit when I saw that on my screen. I immediately denied the call and then noticed he'd sent me about 15 messages asking what time he could pick me up and why I wasn't replying. Of course, I blocked him right away and thought that would be the end of it. The next day, I got a text from an unknown number and checked the picture and saw it was the driver. He asked me why I'd blocked him and started spamming me. I immediately blocked him. Over the course of the next month, I'd get messages from random phone numbers, and it quickly became obvious that it was the driver. I would always block him, but eventually, I reported him on the Uber app and changed my number. Only problem is, he knows where I live.
I'm currently a sophomore in college, and the bar scene here is pretty big. Going out at night to get special deals on alcohol so you can get plastered with your friends is kind of a go-to here. Despite this, I'm not a huge drinker, and I don't enjoy it a lot because it tastes so bad and it hurts my stomach. I do enjoy the company though, and often just go out to be with my friends or meet new people. A lot of the times, I'm called the dad of the group because I end up taking care of them all the time. That's the prelude of what happened when I decided to go out with them one Friday night. So we all got dressed up, pre-gaming a bit at my friend Q's apartment before we Ubered downtown to one of our pretty well-known college bars/clubs. After we got in, my friends immediately split off into tiny groups, combing over the club for girls they wanted to try their shot at spending the night with. This is going to make me sound weird, but one-night stands aren't really my thing, and I don't want to end up cock-blocking my friends. So instead of looking for girls, I usually find someone at the bar and make friends with them. I was chatting with some dude that was wearing a cowboy hat when eventually a girl approached me. She was pretty cute, probably 5'6", with dirty blonde hair and eyes that I think were light brown, but they were so light they almost looked gold, which threw me off a bit. She asked if she could buy me some drinks in exchange for being her friend for the night, and of course I accepted, because hey, that's why I came here. Anyways, she kept her word and we started talking to each other, and she introduced herself as Alexia, but to call her Alex. I asked her some basic stuff about if she came with friends, if she went to college here, etc., to which all the answers were no. That struck me as pretty odd, as it's honestly pretty unsafe to be in the downtown area alone as a girl at like 1 in the morning. She said she wanted to hear about me though, and she actually seemed pretty excited to listen. It felt like a really nice change of pace, because I'm usually the one learning about other people, not the other way around. It also could have been the alcohol starting to take effect, since I'm actually a pretty big lightweight, as like I said, I don't actually binge drink often. The whole time I was talking, she stared into my eyes and had this warm smile that made me feel so acknowledged, if that even makes sense. It felt like she was enjoying her time as much as I was, and that just made me even happier, because I thought it meant I made a new friend. That was when her demeanor began to change. She started to get kind of flirty and eventually asked if I wanted to go home with her. Like I said, I'm not really a one-night stand type of guy, and I explained I like to get to know people a little better before sleeping with them. I'm pretty sure I saw what I think was anger flash across her face, but it was quickly replaced with another smile as she suggested just going home and watching a movie instead. I agreed and pulled out my phone to begin ordering an Uber, but she basically grabbed my wrist and started guiding me outside. I was confused, trying to ask if she was planning on driving after drinking, but she wouldn't really answer me. We eventually got outside of the club, and she pointed to a black Honda Civic parked right in front of the club. That was when all the warning bells rang like a tornado had passed through them. I was pretty drunk at this point in the night, maybe 6 or 7 drinks deep, but I was still aware enough to see the red flags. She said she had come alone, but the lane the car was parked in was only for pickups, and I never saw her order an Uber. Somebody would have had to have been driving the car. This was enough to make me uncomfortable, and I asked again if she was planning to drive the car. She said yes as she continued walking me closer to it. I knew that was a bald-faced lie, and as we got closer, my heart sank as I noticed the outline of 3 other guys in the car. At that point, my adrenaline kicked in, and I yanked my hand away from her and said there's no way in hell I'm getting in that car with her. She tried begging me one more time, saying she really wanted to have sex and would let me do whatever I wanted, but I already had turned around to walk back to the club. She started cussing me out, practically screaming at the top of her lungs as I walked back up to the bouncers to go in. I texted my friends what happened, and we all met back up and went home. It was obvious. She was going to college bars, trying to get guys drunk before offering to sleep with them so she could get them in a car with 3 other men to try to rob them or do God knows what else. I called my city's anonymous tip line and left a detailed description of the girl, car, and place where it happened. That night was a real wake-up call for me, and I am so thankful that despite being drunk, I was able to piece together what was happening before it was too late. Please, remember to always be safe when going out with friends, especially when it's late at night or if alcohol is involved. But to Alexia, who I saw that night at the bar, let's not meet. I love reading posts on this sub, but never thought I'd have anything to contribute. However, while listening to things on YouTube, I suddenly remembered this. I lived alone in a bad neighborhood just outside of the city. At this point, I had been living there for maybe 3 years with no incident. Well, I mean, there were several shootings on my street, but no one shot at me. So, no incident, I guess. I'm the kind of person who can't sit still for very long, so I find myself standing or pacing a lot. On this particular night, maybe at about 2 a.m., I was pacing while reading a textbook to prepare for an upcoming test at my university. I stopped pacing for a little and just stood near my front door to read. That's when I heard the doorknob turn. For some reason, though I nearly shit myself, I was able to calmly look down at my deadbolt to double check that it was locked. It was. Phew. I looked through the peephole to see who was trying to come in, but no one was standing there. Obviously, this was confusing. I neither am superstitious nor a believer in the supernatural, but I'm also stupid. So, my first thought was, is a ghost really trying to break into my house? Thankfully, that thought gave way to a more logical thought of, maybe they're trying to go around back. So, I quickly moved to the back door to make sure it was locked. It was. Phew again. But then, my front doorknob turned again. I tiptoe ran to the front door. At this point, my heart is pounding. My dog, big protective teddy bear, is looking at me with major concern in his eyes. I look to the front peephole again, but there's still no one there. That's when I hear a small knock on my door. As I am looking through the peephole, then a small child's voice says, "Let me in." Silence. "Let me in." I'm still looking through the peephole while covering my mouth with my hand to make my breathing quieter. Through the peephole, I see a small 3-year-old-ish girl walk to the edge of my porch and look into my bushes. She nods and then says, "Okay," in what I think was supposed to be a whisper. She walks closer to the door again, and I lose sight of her in the peephole. She tries the handle again, then knocks and says, "Please, help me." My uncle is a cop, so I had heard about people using children as a way to get people to open their door before blitz attacking. so I'm pretty sure that's what's happening at this point. I wasn't sure how to handle this situation, so I just said, not even into a phone, "Hi, I think someone is trying to break into my apartment." "Yeah, my address? 123 Fake Street Avenue. Yeah, I'll stay on the line." I then saw a shadow emerge from my bushes. Thankfully, they scooped the kid and ran off. There were 2 people and the kid. People who tried to break into my apartment to rob or kill me. Let's not meet.